Live on WFLA Now. With a specialized degree in climate, Chief Meteorologist and Climate Specialist Jeff Berardelli is pioneering the way we look at climate and extreme weather. Welcome to Jeff's Climate Classroom, powered by ArmorView Window and Door.
All right, everybody, welcome again to Climate Classroom. And this week we are talking about the National Climate Assessment. Now, this is the most comprehensive climate report ever put together by the U.S., and it's actually obligated by law. Every 4 to 5 years or so, the National Climate Assessment has to be produced. And essentially, it's an assessment of all the latest science on climate change, how the United States is doing in terms of, how fast we're warming and what kind of extremes we're seeing, but in addition, how we are mitigating and adapting to climate change. So are we putting those solutions forward, and what kind of progress or lack thereof are we making on climate change? So that is going to be the main topic today. And to help me along with that, I want to introduce you to someone you might know if you watch our show regularly. This is Katherine Niemczyk. She's a good friend of mine and also a longtime colleague of mine. We worked together iterations ago in our last job. She operated essentially with me as a unit, the climate unit. She has been my climate producer in the past. And Katherine, first of all, welcome. First time in the studio for the show. You've done it many times, but the first time here.
Yes, first time here. I'm very impressed.
And one thing that she really cares about is how climate change is going to affect people. And some of the people that are going to be affected the most in the state of Florida are the workers who are outside during the middle of the summer. Miami-Dade is thinking about passing a law to help them, but they punted again on this law. So just a quick tidbit, and then we'll get back to it later in the show.
Yeah. So about 1 in 4 workers in Miami actually work outside. And so as the climate warms, they are very affected. It gets more and more dangerous with heat. And so what they're asking for is really just some basic necessities: water, break, and shade.
And you think that would be easy?
You would think.
They keep trying to pass this, and there's a lot of lobbyists who are lobbying against giving workers at least a break during 95-degree heat.
Yeah.
And water. Believe it or not, people are lobbying against that, and they keep punting on voting on it.
Yeah, it's only about, what they're asking for is 10 minutes every 2 hours.
Right.
So it's not much.
Right. I don't know. It's always harder than you think to get these things passed.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to talk more about that in a few seconds. But first, I want to talk about the National Climate Assessment. I'm going to bring up a graphic, and this is simply just going to be kind of an overview as to what it is. So first of all, it's updated every 5 years by law. It's mandated by Congress that we have this climate assessment, and it's huge, okay? Now, it assesses U.S. climate change and our progress in slowing or adapting to it. We have made some progress. I stress some. And it's authored by 500 experts. A lot of them are climate scientists, but there's also people that are in related fields because climate is wide-spanning, right? It affects food, it affects health, it affects all kinds of things. The summary alone, depending on the way you download it, is between 50 and 144 pages, okay? 144 pages from the PDF. So this is a very, very big document. And actually, when I tried to download the full report, Katherine, a couple of days ago, it wasn't even available yet, but the summary was. And believe me, that's long enough. It has a ton of information. So I guess I'll leave it to you, Katherine. You've obviously studied this to some degree. What do you want to chat about?
Well, what's the biggest takeaway? I mean, you say we've made some progress. Where do we stand, and sort of where do you see us going? Are we on track?
No, we're not on track. Where do we stand? Right. I mean, climate change is getting worse. Lawmakers it's been hard to pass laws. We passed a great one here in the United States. They're not regulations though, so it's not necessarily ramping down necessarily on carbon emissions, although we have seen a decrease in carbon emissions. And the reason why we've seen a decrease in carbon emissions is mainly because over the course of the last 10 years, and really starting more so during the Obama administration than anything, we started moving away from coal and moving towards natural gas, fracking, essentially, and then exporting a lot of that. So by doing so, at least theoretically, we've reduced our carbon footprint by, I think it's something like less than 15% emissions reduction since around 2010, give or take. I don't know the exact numbers on it. So we've made some progress, but it's mostly because we switched over to, what they call natural gas. It's really fossil gas. It's mainly methane. And there are some in the science community who actually believe that because of leaks, that gas is actually more polluting and more emissions intensive than coal. So I'm not even really sure the progress that we've made is truly real progress.
Right. And so you kind of touch on a point there that we've made some progress, but carbon emissions are baked in for years, right?
Well, okay, so carbon emissions are not, well, first of all, yeah, they're baked in because we still rely on gas and coal and oil. So until we can completely get ourselves off that, the carbon emissions will always keep going up a little bit. They may not go up at the same rate. They may go up at a slower rate, which is what we're starting to turn the corner to some degree on that.
I see.
But the concentrations in the atmosphere, that is baked in because carbon dioxide lives in the atmosphere for hundreds of years. So that's the problem, is it's up there, right? We can stop emissions totally, and then the natural Earth climate sinks will start taking carbon out of the atmosphere, but it's going to be stuck up there for a long time unless we actively suck it out of the atmosphere by planting more trees and by direct air capture, which you can actually suck carbon out of the atmosphere. It's too expensive right now. The technology is not nearly ready. It's going to be decades before it really truly can start reversing climate change. But we can stabilize climate change and stop the warming by simply getting to net zero, as we call it, essentially making sure that the amount we're emitting is the same amount that we're taking out of the atmosphere. As long as we're not emitting more, then yes, we can stabilize temperatures probably within a few years or a decade or so. It happens pretty quickly.
If we stopped everything.
But that's not reversing it. That's not reversing it. Reversing it means we actually manually have to start reversing it, and that's going to take a long time. Yeah.
And, well, you mentioned too natural gas and methane, and I think it's important to remind people of how potent methane is.
Yeah, it's depending upon how long you're looking at it in terms of its lifetime. If you're looking at, generally speaking, it's something like 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide, at least over the course of the first 10 years. If you're looking at it over the course of 30 plus years, it's something like 10 times more potent or something like that. But anyway, over the short term, it's a lot more potent than carbon dioxide. And actually, we've seen methane levels more than triple, I think, in the atmosphere since the turn of the Industrial Revolution.
Wow.
Whereas carbon dioxide's only gone up by 50%. Only 50%.
Yeah.
But it's the highest that it's been in millions of years, literally millions of years.
Yeah.
So I want to show you one of the headlines from the National Climate Assessment. And this is something that still, believe it or not, people in the U.S. and all over the world don't quite understand quite yet, which is, it's hard to understand how it's not understood because the science has been out there for so long. But this is one of the top line statements from the National Climate Assessment. The global warming observed over the industrial era is unequivocally, which means essentially undeniably and not debatably, so essentially it can't be undebatably, caused by greenhouse gas emissions from human activities, primarily the burning of fossil fuels. Okay, so that's a pretty declarative statement. It's not the first one that we've seen in these reports. I think the last National Climate Assessment said that, and I also think that at least a couple of the IPC statements, reports over the past several years have said that as well. So we know beyond the shadow of a doubt that climate change is being caused by the burning of fossil fuels.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about these reports. We have the National Climate Assessment, we have the IPCC reports, and they all kind of say the same thing. So is that, I mean, do you think that message is getting across?
Clearly not.
Yeah.
Look, first of all, these reports are dense. There's a lot of information in them. The problem, I think, really is that people choose the media they want to watch today. We used to have a shared interest 20, 30 years ago when, there weren't that many media sources to choose from, and the truth was simply the truth, right? I mean, it still is the truth. But now that we have partisan media to some degree, people just choose the media that's most convenient to them, the one they want to listen to. And oftentimes the one they want to listen to may or may not cover climate. Maybe they want to listen to climate stuff, and so they choose a certain media that always covers it. They know all they need to know, and they know more than the average person. And then other people are watching the same news all the time. They never veer away from it, and maybe that particular news source doesn't ever cover climate change. So I think that's a problem we're going to have into the future. It's certainly not a lack of information, right? There have been tens of thousands of papers, white papers produced on this. There have been millions of articles on climate change. I would argue, especially over the past couple of years, we've seen a huge ramp up in articles. Mainstream media like the New York Times, the Washington Post, and a lot of local newspapers as well in addition to seeing a lot more of it on the network news as well. But if you're someone who watches cable news and you've chosen to watch one versus another, you may or may not get climate information.
Well, and that's why I think it's so important just for people like us in our industry to focus on the communication of climate science. And it's for many decades not really been successful. So I think that, a concerted effort to improve that is really needed and hopefully improving.
The networks are starting to hire more climate people. But again, if people just choose to ignore it because they can choose any media they want, it's difficult. I mean, it's not for lack of information. Let's put it that way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. So I want to get back to the National Climate Assessment, and one of the top lines of it, which is that billion-dollar disasters are increasing. Now, this is not just due to climate change. I mean, climate extremes are getting worse. Katherine, we talked about this before. It's just kind of, I think, common sense. But essentially, if there's more energy in the system, then weather is going to be more extreme. The more energy, the more steroids that you have in your arm, the stronger you get, right? So essentially, that's what extra warmth is in the atmosphere. It's steroids for storms. So that's one of the reasons. And also, stuff is more expensive now. And by the way, people are living in more vulnerable places. So because of that, the number of billion-dollar disasters have increased by sixfold, so 6 times since the 1980s. We used to average around $3 billion disasters every year back in the 1980s. Now we average close to 20. This year it's 25. And it's inflation adjusted. So we're not talking, well, in the 1980s it was harder to get to $1 billion. That's not the way it is. This is all adjusted so that it's equal money back then, equal money now. So
we're talking $1 billion
that's
disasters.
Right. 3 disasters that amount to $1 billion. Now we have 20. This year it's 25. It's the highest we've ever had.
Wow. And
the cost increase is about 5 times. Again, equal dollars. Okay, so it used to cost us $200 billion back then. Now it costs us $1 trillion. So we've seen the cost increase by 5 times. Again, that $200 billion back in the 1980s is adjusted to today's dollars, just so everyone knows that we're not talking about money back in the 1980s. Here.
So that $200 billion was the total
per year of damages.
Now it's up to $1 trillion.
Now it's about $1 trillion per year in damages.
Okay, and can you talk about the map behind there with the redder states?
So the darker the shade of red, the more billion-dollar disasters, or the higher. It's actually cost. It's actually the cost.
Okay.
So Florida is the darkest shade, and by mistake, I put the graphic on top of it. But Florida, over the past few years, so 2018 Hurricane Michael and then 2022 Hurricane Ian alone was close to $150 billion worth of damage. So you don't need many more billion-dollar disasters or $100 million disasters to get to that $200 billion, which is about what Florida has seen in terms of damage over the past 4 years. It's a lot of money. This has real impacts. This has real impacts on the U.S. economy. It makes things more expensive. Insurance companies are fleeing the state of Florida. We talk about that. A lot of that does have to do with the replacement cost. Essentially, it costs more money to replace a house now because it's got to be built better. Materials cost more money. And climate disasters are becoming more frequent and they're becoming stronger. And so insurance companies want no part of it. So things are legitimately costing more because of climate change already.
And that's just when we're talking about like the loss to homes and infrastructure. That's not even the impact on just individual health.
That's right. Health. We're not talking about health at all. In fact, we're not really factoring in.
Yeah.
If you started putting dollar amounts on health, you would see those numbers skyrocket for sure.
Right.
Speaking of skyrocketing, I should have put this as the second graphic, but let me just show you how carbon dioxide has increased. It used to be at around 280 parts per million back in the 1800s, and now it's at 418 parts per million. Now, I should say, because this might be confusing to some people, right? What is a parts per million? I think that probably some people may not quite understand what it means. So if you had 100 molecules in the atmosphere of air, so nitrogen and oxygen and carbon dioxide and all that stuff, that means that back in the 1800s, 280 of those molecules were carbon dioxide. Now, 418 of the million molecules in this parcel, this little bubble of air, are carbon dioxide. That's a 50% increase, and it's the highest that it's been in many millions of years on Earth, by far.
And that's in our atmosphere. That's the air around us, the air that we
That's
breathe.
right. The air we breathe. Yep.
So trees are loving it. We not are
Trees
not.
do like carbon dioxide. That's right, but there are less. That's the other problem. That's the
Yeah.
other problem that we have is that we're deforesting stuff, so there's less trees to suck in the carbon dioxide. The extra carbon dioxide we put in the atmosphere, if we had a gajillion trees, we'd be able to suck a lot of that carbon dioxide back out of the atmosphere. But we're deforesting everything. Why? There's 8 billion people living on Earth, and a lot of it is animal agriculture. We're using the land. We're we're destroying those forests to grow feed for livestock so that we can eat meat. And so a lot of it is that. Okay, so take a look at the rate change in carbon over the last 800,000 years. So essentially 1 million years. Take a look at how the rate change has kind of always been about the same. Sometimes it spikes a little bit here and there, but the change rate over the past 100 years has been, I have to do the math on this, at least, more than 10 times faster than it's ever been. And it's the fastest rate of rise in the last 66 million years. So, carbon dioxide is rising at a rate faster than it has in 66 million years. And most of that happening over the past 100 years. There's no chance this is coincidence, right?
Right. And so, so just to reiterate this is the rate of rise as opposed to the amount.
That's right.
Because in the past, there has been...
Not in the past million years.
Right. But
yeah.
Well, I guess I think it's helpful to acknowledge that in the past there have been times when there was more carbon in the atmosphere. But what we're talking about when we talk about climate change, it's how quickly we put it. Yeah. So I'll let you talk.
The change. Yeah. Well, it's good. It's how quickly the carbon dioxide is rising and how quickly the temperature is rising in response to that. Right. It's the rate of change. People always say, "Well, what's the optimum temperature? Why wouldn't warmer be better? Maybe it would be better, but it wouldn't be better in the snap of a finger. It's changing too fast for many animals on Earth and for humans to adapt. It's not that we can't adapt, right? It's not that we're going to be too hot, although some of us will be too hot. It's more so that the systems that we have designed to sustain us, our food systems, our water systems, sea level rise, where our infrastructure is, that can't be adapted to fast enough, as fast as the rate of change of temperature. That's the problem.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of technology relies on a certain temperature to run.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. So going back to this graphic just one more time in case some folks didn't understand it, it basically just shows every 1,000 years what has been the rate of change, how fast carbon dioxide changed. You can see it was always less than like 20. On the left side, you can see the scale right there, right? But it's in parts per million. So it's never been over the course of 1,000 years more than 20. Actually, it's been almost 20 in one particular instance over the past 800,000 years. But over the past 100 years, it's gone up by more than 120 parts per million. So it's the rate of change is enormously faster than it's ever been before. Yeah. All right. So I figure out what's next.
What is next?
Well, I put you up on the screen so that I could see what's next. Okay.
Oh.
So you were my guinea pig just now.
Okay.
Yeah, because I didn't want to. But anyway, so we're going to talk about the impacts of climate change, especially here in the southeast U.S. and more so in the state of Florida. They're somewhat similar. Obviously, going to warm up everywhere, right? But let's bring up this graphic right here. So we don't know exactly how much we're going to warm by the end of the century. We're likely going to get to, right? So far we've warmed, Katherine, by about 2 degrees Fahrenheit. Maybe it's slightly more than that globally. Okay. We expect there's a good chance that we will end up warming around 5 degrees Fahrenheit before we put a stop to this. Before humans are able to kind of get their arms around it and completely stop this runaway train.
Right.
We're probably going to get to 5 degrees. May it be less? It could be less, but let's assume it's going to be 5 because that's a pretty good estimate of where we're going based upon the current policies right now. So
can I just ask? Again, I like to remind people of what the impacts of 5 degrees of warming are. I don't know if you're going to jump into that later on, but...
bringing you back up on the screen.
Oh, okay, great. But I think it's good to remind people of what does that mean for the average person?
Well, I equate it to the fever, to your body temperature. If your body temperature is 98, you feel fine. If it's 103, you're in trouble. I mean, you may not be dead.
Yeah.
But you're not functioning. You're not able to work. You probably can't get out of bed. So that's essentially what we're doing to the Earth system. It's the same thing. The Earth system is just as sensitive as our body is. So a rise in 2 degrees, we can still go to the store, right? If your body temperature goes from 98 to 100, which is where we are right now, right? We're at 100 degree body temperature. You can probably get up. You may be able to go to work. You can accomplish tasks, but you don't feel great. You're not running at, you're not running a
marathon.
You're not. That's for sure. By the end of the century, or maybe before that, probably 2080, we're close to 103 degrees Fahrenheit, our body temperature. At that point, you're not doing anything. You're just trying to survive. You're going to survive.
Yeah.
Get to 105, now you're really in trouble. Now you may not survive. So that's kind of what we're looking at later in the century, unless we can kind of reel this in. It's difficult. There's 8 billion people, competing interests on Earth, and so it's been challenging. So I want to show you this graphic right here. Let me bring it full screen because it needs to be a little bit bigger. So basically, if we warm by 5 degrees, and we think that's probably the case by, let's say, 2080, it may be 2090, it may be 2100, it may be 2070, but it probably is going to be around that time. We will see about 80 days per year here in Tampa, somewhere between 70 and 90 days a year, where we will be 95 or more. Right now, we only have, believe it or not, I know it's a hot place to live, but Tampa only usually has around 10 days per year where the air temperature is 95 degrees. But in 50 years from now, that'll be basically every day of the summer will be 95 degrees.
So when you take into account heat index, the humidity, where does that get us?
Yeah, pretty much every day during the summer, the heat index will be 110 or more, right? And we had a lot of 110 heat index days, a lot of 105 heat index days this year in Tampa. But this summer is going to be this summer, if you're watching from Florida, this summer will be every summer in about 10 years from now. So by the early 2030s, every single summer will be as hot as it was this summer in the state of Florida. Miami had by far their hottest summer. It was ridiculous down there. And then by 2050, it'll be worse. And then by 2070 or 2080, people probably won't want to live here. And they may not be able to because of sea level rise, at least along the coast. So that's something that we'll also talk about. Let me see what the next graphic is here.
Well, I was going to ask.
Oh, sea level rise. Look at that. How
well,
convenient.
okay. I'll let you.
No.
Move on
Go ahead.
that.
Ask what you're going to ask, and I can go backwards if I need to.
Well, I was going to ask, like, that temperature change, how does that impact the oceans and weather patterns?
Yeah, again, more energy is like steroids for storms. It makes hurricanes stronger. It makes rainfall heavier, at least the heaviest rainfall. And it makes heat waves exceedingly worse. They last longer. They are more intense. It just makes life a lot more difficult. Oh, and by the way, it taxes our economic system. So things just, more air conditioning, power prices, likely spike because everybody's using, more energy. Hurricanes are stronger, so it's causing more destruction. Stuff needs to be built back. So again, climate change is going to hit us, and it already is by far hitting us in the pocketbook right now. Yeah. Okay, you want to talk about sea level rise now?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so let's bring this up here. And I've talked about sea level rise in one of the last climate classrooms, but this is straight from the National Climate Assessment Report. And basically what you see here is an intermediate scenario on the left. Intermediate scenario is assuming that we do some work in trying to reel in runaway climate change, that we reduce the amount of carbon dioxide that we're putting in the atmosphere by reducing the number of, the amount of fossil fuels that we use. So it's an intermediate scenario. We don't know exactly what's going to happen 30 years from now in terms of the way humans are going to use fossil fuels, right? So we go with a middle of the road scenario. We're saying here, okay, we're not going to act too quickly, but we're also not going to act, we're going to act a little bit. We're going to reel in carbon dioxide emissions to an extent. And so this is the middle of the road predictions. There are also high-end scenarios where we do nothing at all and carbon dioxide continues to skyrocket. And then there are the low-end scenarios where we do a lot of work really quickly, which is not happening right now. And then we see less sea level rise. But anyway.
So we're middle of the road right now. Intermediate?
Yeah, that's about where we are. We're on track for probably middle of the road. So I think this is a safe assessment here.
Okay.
So let me zoom in to the right side because that's by 2100. So where you see the darker shades of orange there and brown, that's about 5+ feet of sea level rise that is projected in an intermediate scenario by 2100. That's in the western part of the Gulf of Mexico. So anywhere essentially from around New Orleans westward, or even slightly east of New Orleans, westward, 5, maybe 6 feet of sea level rise.
And
Some of that,
the black dots are?
those are tide gauges.
Okay.
That's where we have gauges. Yeah. That's what that is. Good question. And then on the eastern side of the Gulf of Mexico, it's more like 3 to 4 feet. So we're going to see about an extra 1.5 feet of sea level rise in the western Gulf. Part of that is due to subsidence. Land is actually sinking in the western Gulf, especially in places like Louisiana. So it's not just an increase in sea level rise due to the melting of glaciers, Greenland, Antarctica. It's also due to subsidence of the land in places like
What causes that?
Why does the land
sink?
It depends on where you are. Everywhere
Yeah.
is different. Believe it or not, Miami Beach is sinking probably because of the weight of its buildings.
Oof.
I mean, so Miami Beach was landfill. So essentially, there was nothing on Miami Beach. They brought dirt in, and so it was going to sink anyway, right? Over the course of time, it actually starts to compound. So it really depends upon where you're talking about.
Okay. And what would this mean for the state of Florida? I mean,
it would mean a lot of displacement.
Yeah.
You know, it would mean some places become uninhabitable. Here in the Tampa Bay area, we have various areas that are under 3 feet of sea level. So there would always be water. You wouldn't be able to sell your home, obviously. So you'd be stuck with that asset, stranded asset, essentially. And you just wouldn't be able to live in certain areas unless they do what Miami Beach did, was invest $500 million to raise the streets. But not everybody can do that, right? Only really rich areas have enough tax money to raise the streets 3 feet, which is what Miami Beach did.
Yeah. And this is staying the course, essentially. This is where we get to.
No, this is actually, this would be a situation where we honor our commitments. So governments have committed to a certain amount of emissions reductions. And if we stay the course on our commitments, then we end up in an intermediate scenario. If we somehow dodge these commitments, or we end up straying from the commitments, then we end up with more warming and potentially more sea level rise. The thing about sea level rise, though, is it's going to ramp up quickly, but towards the end of the century. So essentially, you know, we'll see about another foot or less of sea level rise in the Gulf of Mexico by 2050, around a foot. We'll see about a foot more. But then all of a sudden, by the end of the century, now we're up to 3 or 4 feet. So it starts to really increase faster. I wouldn't say exponential, because it's not exponential, but it starts to double at a quicker pace as we head towards the end of the century. So I would argue in many ways we're generally okay. Most people's properties will be all right. You might start losing some value. There's some analysts who say there's already that property values are already overvalued in many parts of coastal Florida. But you might be okay for the next couple of decades on that. But things will start happening a lot faster towards the middle and end of the century in terms of sea level rise.
I mean, are these commitments enough, though? Because it kind of seems like we should be.
I mean, are they enough? No. I mean, the reality is that if we want to save ourselves from a tremendous economic liability, not to mention a huge burden on the shoulders of our children, and a tremendous compromise to their to the lifestyles they're going to be able to live in the future, then no, we need to do it immediately. But there's no appetite in this world for immediate cessation of fossil fuels. We couldn't even really do it if we wanted to, right? We need fossil fuels right now. I'm the first to admit fossil fuels have built the empire that we stand on right now, not just the U.S., but all the countries around the world. The reason why we have the technology we have, the creature comforts that we have, being able to fly from place to place, drive from place to place, have air conditioning, is because of technology and it's because of fossil fuels, right? So it takes a little while to stop a Titanic cruise ship. You know what I mean? Not, but that's
you can't
it, right?
flip
It's a
a
cruise ship.
switch.
It's moving in a.
Yeah.
So, but we certainly could act faster if we wanted, but there's a lot of money in the status quo. There's a ton of special interest money. Katherine, you know better than anyone, right?
I guess so.
Yeah. So it's really hard, and there's a lot of fight back against, a lot of money fighting, a lot of climate denial money, a lot of people trying to stop progress. I mean, a lot of these, wind projects, and especially wind projects, there's a lot of money behind trying to stop them from succeeding. It's hopefully it's 2 steps forward and only 1 step back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's see what's next here. Let me fast forward here. Oh, well, this is convenient. All right, let's talk about it. Okay. So
We plan that.
there are bright spots here. And that is, the thing about technology is that it gets cheaper quick. And solar energy, if you had asked someone if solar energy would be ready for prime time 20 years ago ever, they would say, no, it's too expensive. It doesn't work that well. Well, it works well now, and it's actually less expensive than most fossil fuels now. Solar energy costs have dropped 90% over the past decade, and 80% of new electricity generation in the U.S. in 2020, and it's likely true this year too, is coming from renewable energy sources. So we are making progress. Again, not maybe as fast as people like you and me, because we're in the climate space, right, would like to see it, but we are making progress in the U.S. And actually, I have another graphic here. This is, and let me put this full screen. So this side by side, essentially the left side shows the average cost of solar energy, and you can see how it's actually dollars per megawatt hour, which doesn't mean much to most people. So, but you can see how it's gone from around $220 per megawatt hour down to about $40 per megawatt hour. So it's a tremendous decrease in price, and it's put it below the price of fossil fuels. So that's what, look, in a capitalist system like we have, money is everything, right? And economic advantages are really what drives change. And so we're seeing change because of that. On the right side, EVs. So EVs, this is cumulative EVs that are sold in the United States, now up to around a little over 3 million. This year alone, in the U.S., we're going to get to about the million mark. So this year we will sell around 1 million new EVs or plug-in hybrid vehicles. I think it includes, that number includes both this year. And in this quarter, the fourth quarter of 2023, 1 in every 10 new cars sold is an EV or a plug-in hybrid vehicle. 1 in every 10, which is so we're making last year it was 7%. This quarter, the fourth quarter. This year, it is 10% in the fourth.
Yeah. Well, back to solar and clean energy. What about wind and hydro?
Wind is having some problems right now. And have you read anything about what's happening on the East Coast up in the Northeast? Okay.
I don't think so.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot. That's okay. No, I didn't ask you to do it. They're having a major problem, and most of it is cost issues. Supply chain costs have gone up a lot. But it's not just that. There's a lot of pushback from special interests. So it's a combination of a lot of things. Also, there's delays in the approval process. The federal government has been slow in approving projects. Some may say that that's just the way the federal government works. That there are levers that are in place to keep things going slowly so that you can make sure that you do your due diligence, you're not harming anything in the environment. But there is a whole conspiracy out there that offshore wind is hurting whales, which there's no evidence that that's happening whatsoever. And you could easily say the same thing of any kind of oil drilling out there too, because there's a lot of, so essentially they're worried about the acoustics. And there's acoustics that go along with oil drilling as well. So there's been no proof at all. But I understand that there are environmentalists out there, true environmentalists, who really believe that this could potentially hurt whales. So there's due diligence that needs to be done. But most of the people are disingenuous. Most of the people who believe that whales are truly being harmed by wind turbines out there, it's mostly just people that don't want the wind turbines for whatever reason. And oftentimes it's funded by fossil fuel interests that just simply don't want to see that transition happen as quickly as it's happening. Yeah. So anyway, the point being that offshore projects off New Jersey coast have failed. 2 of them, I think, failed just recently. And I don't know.
Failed to get
They were on the way. They were on the way, and they just abandoned them because they became too expensive and there were too many delays. Yeah.
That's too bad.
So, but onshore wind is doing well in places where there is wind. So land, wind on land, in especially the plain states and Texas. Texas is the leader by far in wind in the United States, and so is North Dakota. They do very well in wind too. And it's extraordinarily cheap if you live near those areas for electricity from wind.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think let's see if we have anything else. I don't think there's much more here. Oh, okay. So for the people that are watching from the Tampa Bay area, this is just an idea of how much sea level rise we may see by 2060. So essentially in the next 35 years or so, just to give you an idea of what's coming your way at the end of this mortgage cycle. And in general, we think there's probably going to be about another foot of sea level rise on top of what we've had by 2060. I know it's really hard to see, but if you look at that little box, it says, that little box says high, intermediate. So that's 1.52 feet. So that'd be like 18 inches, right? However, this is based on, I believe, either 2000 or 2005 levels of sea level. Anyway, point is it's going to be about a foot, maybe 14 inches of sea level rise in the Tampa Bay area by 2050, 2060. So that's a lot. That's pretty significant. And it'll ratchet up. It'll go faster towards the end of the century. So, okay, let's switch gears quickly, and then we don't have too much more time in the show, but we want to talk about what's going on in Miami, Miami-Dade County specifically. Essentially, there's a law that was proposed, they're trying to make it into a law where they allow workers to have breaks every 2 hours when it is extremely hot, right? So how's that going?
Not well. And actually, I want to talk about it's when the actual temperature reaches 95 degrees, which I came to you with questions about that. Yeah. Because that's not taking into account what I mentioned previously, which is the heat index.
That's right.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, it's just the actual temperature, 95 degrees. It doesn't happen that often in Miami, although it happened a lot this summer because it was a really, really hot summer.
But a lot means
95 degrees. It's the actual temperature.
Yeah, but a lot. You're saying. I think we counted it. It was like 6 to 8 times
on average a year.
No, this summer.
Oh, it was more than that. No. This year it was. I forget. It was.
Okay.
It could have been as many as 20. It may have happened 20 times this summer.
Okay.
But this was the hottest summer on record ever in Miami. I mean, by far. But it's usually a lot less than that. I'd have to check to see what the average is. I'm going to say maybe a dozen times, maybe less. That's not that many times, So essentially, they'd only be getting breaks if this law passes, at least in today's climate, once, maybe 2 or 3 times a month.
Yeah.
Days where they would need those breaks. And by the way, the air temperature is only 95 degrees for like 2 or 3 hours during the day. It's not like the whole day. It's not like they're getting breaks at 8 a.m., 10 a.m. They're getting breaks when it's 95 degrees, which is not for a very long part of the day at all. And then, yes, on top of that, we're not including humidity. So I don't really love the idea of passing a law at 95. It should be when the heat index is above a certain number, because that's really the problem, right? Some people call it the wet bulb global temperature. It's a little different than the heat index, but the bottom line is it factors in humidity or wind. In case of heat index, it's humidity. And when it's really humid outside, your body doesn't sweat. And so you can't cool yourself down. So this law does not take into account the heat index, which I believe to be the more dangerous of the two numbers than the actual temperature.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this has been the fight for this. I think has been going on for a few years, and it's already been watered down, and changed from heat index to an actual temperature of 95, and this is basic rights of outdoor workers, so farm workers, construction workers. And it's been punted down the road yet again.
I know you really care about this. It's funny because we come at climate change we've been working together for years, folks, and we come at climate change from 2 different angles. Catherine's always worried about those who are disadvantaged and its impact on human health. I do care about that, but for me, I'm always coming at it from a science perspective. I think it's fascinating science, and I'd like to educate people. I'm also concerned, not really for my future. I'm concerned for my daughter's future, right? She's 2 years old. I'm also concerned, especially for those who are at a disadvantage in this world. We are at an advantage. We live in the United States, the richest country in the world. So no matter what happens to us, it's going to happen first and worse to most of the other people in the world, and for the people who are disadvantaged in our own nation. So that does concern me. But Katherine, that's really your emphasis, making sure that this is a just transition, that there's justice for people as climate change gets worse, and in the solutions to climate change.
Right, and taking care of the people on the front lines. It's sad everything kind of comes down to money, and the people who don't have it are oftentimes in the center of, the build out of LNG, liquefied natural gas facilities, for example. So immediate environment is being polluted, and then again, this is adding to the issue of global warming. So it's
a double whammy.
It is.
Yeah. You know what? That's a great point that you make. So, any last words, Katherine, before I close out this show?
No, just thanks for having me. Nice visiting Tampa.
Katherine and I, again, worked together for a long time, and we are constantly talking about climate. It's on our minds all the time. So, Katherine, thank you so much for joining us in studio this week.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Been my pleasure.
And to everyone at home, thank you for joining me. You can listen to this. First of all, I don't know exactly where you might be listening to it right now. You might be on our website, WFLA.com. You might be watching it on Facebook. Right after this is done, we're going to package this up and we're going to toss it over to YouTube. And it'll be available on YouTube. And then you can also listen to it as a podcast on Spotify and also on Apple. What is it called? Apple what? Is it the Apple Store? Apple Podcasts? Apple
something.
Whatever it is.
It's like a little purple
That's right.
app icon.
That's right. You can watch it there. You can listen to it there as well. So again, thank you so much for joining me. Oh, and by the way, go to our website and check out the article that I wrote. It has more information and links to the actual report itself. You can find it under the weather tab on our website. Go to Climate Classroom, and it should be the very first story that you see right there. So once again, I want to thank you for joining me and tell you to have a great day and a great weekend upcoming, everybody.
Watch or listen to Jeff's Climate Classroom, powered by Armor View Window and Door on WFLA social media platforms, and find Jeff's climate reports on WFLA.com.